Hi there. I am going live. Oh, and I'm early today. So we'll let this go around to the platforms that we need. And I'll give it a minute before we start up because I was early. I was very nervous about that button going away as we're going forward with it. So, good morning. I know this is earlier than I usually do, but we had some conflicts today. I'm training this afternoon and doing another live event with Lizzie Morris. So this was the time slot that we had available. So we're making it work. Um, I think we're good to go. Maybe looking, asking. Seems good. Okay, well, welcome everybody. And my name, I guess I should start first. I make the assumption, right? It's not a good assumption. My name is Tricia Broderick. I'm a coach and trainer with Agile for All. And I have been coming to you live for a couple weeks now, or well, actually every other week for quite some time now. And today's topic, is going to be about listening. We've been doing quite a bit of it, especially with the racial equity conversations that we've been having within, specifically within Agile Alliance community for the racial equity series that April Jefferson and Anthony Marcano have been helping us facilitate. And it's always fascinating because everybody says, I'm a great listener. I mean, we put it everywhere. And most of us, I can speak for myself or your friends, right? We're not always great at listening as we think we are. And we do a lot of different things when it comes to listening. And Zoom makes it even harder because there's so many distractions. And now those pop-ups can come. I mean, I'm on Facebook and I just saw a bunch of pop-ups come for something that's on my personal page. And it can just be really distracting. But there's actually just dynamics that are happening within your head without any of those other distractions that can happen that actually hurt our ability to listen. And I'm going to give it kind of in two different parts. Okay. One is just in our own habits. So we've somehow given ourselves this message that in order for the other person to know, excuse me, to know, see, it's early. And I have no voice apparently. So to know that to make sure that the other person knows that we're listening, we do random things. So like sometimes, let me give you a specific example and let's walk through that one. Nodding. Now, at its core, it is very natural and normal for people that the minute you hear something you agree with, you for a lot of people they'll nod along with it, right? It's a tool that a lot of speakers and trainers will use when we're looking on the crowd, is to hear if the message is resonating. We're looking for those nods at times. The hard part is, especially as a leader, when I'm listening to somebody as a leader, I have to realize that I have some positional power, especially if I'm their manager and not just a leader in the organization. And when I nod, I could have a lot of different meanings in my nod. So if you're talking to me and I nod, I could be just saying, yes, continue on. I could be saying, I agree with what you're saying. I could be saying, sure, just keep going. Come on. Like, let's move it along here. I gotta go. Like, come on. I'm almost placating you a little bit, honestly. Or it could mean nothing at all and I don't even realize that I'm doing it. It's a habit. I was a big time nodder. I nodded a lot and I still nod. It's not that I'm saying you can never nod. It's just don't be a bobblehead. And also understand that what you think you're communicating with that nod might not be what they're receiving. I cannot tell you how many times somebody would tell me something and then as they're walking away, they're like, okay, well, let me know when that's done. And I'm like, when did I take ownership? I'm like, how did I end up with this thing? And sure enough, if I dived into that, often it was because I was nodding. And for me, the nod just meant keep going. For them, it meant I agree. Yeah, I'll do it. And I was like, no, that is not what my nod meant. but it was a habit that I had as a way to basically engage without interrupting. But the problem is that is still interrupting. It is still sending information, whether it's always the information you want it to be sending or whether it's always the information you feel it should be sending. And so we do this because we think it's helping the other person. It's allowing them to know that we're engaged. But honestly, if it's sending different messages, is that really helping the other person? Or is it just a habit you have that that's how you communicate and engage? So, a stupid trick that I did to help myself personally stop nodding as much is when people are talking, I will often have my hands under my thing because if I do, I'm going to jam my teeth and I'll figure out really quick. And it was just a way that I had to learn how to break the habit so that it wasn't my go to way of listening. And communicating with those things. I still nod. I still find, especially when somebody says something I completely agree with, I'm like, yeah, that's right. But don't use it as a way to avoid talking and thinking that it's really crystal clear because it can mean a lot of different things. Okay. That's one part of us not listening very well. And I gave nodding as an example, but there's others. I just heard this one yesterday. Somebody was saying, yeah, I've replaced the nod with mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's for you. It's not for them. They don't need it. They really don't need it. Because you can demonstrate that you're listening in lots of other ways. But let me talk about another area that actually prevents us from fully listening as well. And the material from this is McKay, Davis, and Fanny from a book called Messages. And they highlighted some listening blocks. And listening blocks are things that put you up in your own internal head, back up to internal listening, level 1, instead of listening to the other person. And some of them are, there's 12 that they list. I'm only going to give a couple today, and going through them. But there's some that you kind of go, well, of course that's not listening. And one is comparing. Now, if I'm comparing while you're telling a story, I'm actually comparing myself to you. What would I do? How would have I responded? What is like where who's more competent? Who's more healthy? Now those sound really nasty. You're like, Tricia, I would never do that. Oh, that's cute. Yes, you do. We're all human. We all do different things. It doesn't mean that it always comes out of our mouth. It doesn't mean that it happens every time. But there is times when you're comparing of yourself to somebody else. Especially, I find I do it more with people I respect and more not as a putting the other person down, as trying to challenge myself of what would I, how could I get better, and watching and comparing myself to what they did. So it doesn't always have to be this really negative, arrogant kind of dynamic, other than just part of what sometimes can happen when you're listening as you go internal and you start comparing yourself to the person telling the story and how they're responding versus how you're responding, who's smarter, who's more competent, and what's happening with that. Now clearly that's not listening, and this one for me doesn't happen as much. Like, it's not a frequent one, but it feels bad when it is happening. You kind of know that you're not fully listening to that person, because if you're up here thinking about, how you compare to that person, you can't really hear, and you might end up throwing in one of those nods or those ahas because you're elsewhere, not fully engaged in what they're sharing and why they're sharing. They're not thinking about, they have no idea that that's what you're up in your own head about unless you say something. But it's not fully listening, and it is a block that people can experience and do experience. So if that one's kind of but Tricia, that seems nasty, and I'm a much better listener, and I would never do that. Okay, fine, we'll play with that. But I'll have a challenge for you at the end. Okay, so let's go to another one that I find that I do quite a bit, and it's because personally I'm a storyteller. I talk in stories often. And so I think about what experiences I have frequently. And so identifying is when you are listening and someone's telling a story and you refer it back to your own experiences. So if someone's telling me a story about a conflict, I start thinking about and identifying a conflict I had that's similar. And and in some ways it's I do it mentally, at least this is the story I tell myself. I do it so that I can think of a story that in case this story helps this person, I need to be able to have a story quickly available. But the reality is the minute I'm in that space of trying to identify a story that's relatable to what and identify with what they're talking about, I'm not listening. I could miss a key part of their story that makes theirs completely different from mine, only I'm identifying to this story and then somehow that's the focus for me. I've done this where I totally had somebody highlighting a challenge that they were having in terms of bringing up a conversation, and I went to this problem where I had a challenge bringing up a conversation, and because I was in that space thinking of that experience, my own personal experience that I identified and it reminded me of, I missed a really key part of their story. And so they finished, and I was like, oh, I'm going to mentor and I'm going to throw this story out. And I got done, and they were like, that's a lovely story. It has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. And I'm like, no, I wasn't listening. And so we have to be careful because we can almost tell ourselves that that identification can be really valuable for keeping the conversation going. But the reality is I'm pretty quick on my feet and thinking of these stories. I didn't need to be doing that while they're talking. I could even pause and say, if they needed a story from me, and say, let me think about that for a second and give myself that time. I don't need to use the time while they're still talking. And so when I find myself getting up in there, I have to go, nope, not about me, not like this is not, I'll have time to do that later, get back. And I just kind of become aware of it, and I try and let it go really quickly and put it back towards the other. If I find that I can't let it go, I've mentioned this on my blog and in different areas. One of the other things that I'll do is I'll make a little quick note. I don't write it in sentence format, but I might make a note of the name of the person that I had to struggle with the conversation with or something, just so I write it down, because then I can, A, it does not come out of my mouth, and B, it doesn't stay up here in my head, so I can go back to listening and truly hearing what the other person's saying. And so sometimes I'll do a quick note just to let it go when I find it's bubbling up, so I can really be as present as I can, as I'm trying to be for that person and listening. So that's two. So we had comparing, we had identifying. And then I wanted to give a third one, and I wanted to go in a different direction that I think happens to a lot of people. And again, there's 12 total out there. We'll put a link into chat at some point with it. And again, the book was called Messages from McKay, Davis, and Fanning. And I wanted to pick the third one as a one that I think is super, super common, but no one really likes to admit about it. And I do it all the time. And they labeled it rehearsing. And so when you're rehearsing, you don't have this time to listen because you're rehearsing what you're going to say next. And I find I do this most when I'm in a really challenging conversation. I do this most when I'm about to speak next. So like, let's say somebody's up on the stage and they're talking, and instead of listening to what they're saying, I'm actually rehearsing what my first lines are going to be as I get up on that stage next. And the problem is when you're rehearsing, you're really not hearing anything else anybody's saying. You're crafting and preparing. Well, so if I take those two examples, in the latter one, in the stage one, where Tricia, maybe you don't have to hear what that person's saying. And there might be some truth to that. Maybe you already even know the script that they're saying. But the problem is when it works really well in terms of the audience, is that if you can feed off of what that person on the stage is saying as you go into your session. And I just had this done. I participated in Agile 100. I was one of the speakers. And the speaker before me was talking about, they were talking about their products and having to be able to tell somebody their product is not good. And they use the term, if your baby's ugly, I need to hear it. And I kind of chuckled at that. It made me think of Seinfeld and um, uh, dating myself maybe. And I but because I was listening and I wasn't rehearsing what I was going to kick off my conference session with, I actually was able to incorporate and lead that right into my session, which was about conflict resolution. And if someone does tell you your baby's ugly, what are you gonna do? And people really appreciate it because it makes it flow together. It makes it seem as if we are working together as one. It's not this disjointed one speaker, then the next speaker, then the next speaker. And that's just a better experience for your audience as you're speaking. And so I really am trying to get better at not rehearsing when I'm listening to the previous person when it's my turn next. So that's my pitch for that. For the other scenario where you're in a confrontation, you're in a conflict, it's heated, they're making statements, and you're thinking about your arguments back. You're thinking about how you're going to respond, what your next statement's going to be, how you're going to land that next statement. Super, super dangerous because you're not listening. And if they're doing the same thing, this is why people just talk right past each other, why people are just talking at each other, because no one's listening when they're actually going through. And so you have to give yourself almost permission that you're going to take some time after that person finishes speaking to maybe, in that case, rehearse then, or to think about how you want to respond. But if you're doing that while they're still talking, you might be missing some key moments of a bridge that could be built, some kind of alignment that you may have, some kind of moment that you could have some agreement on, and it flew right by you because you were focused on how you were going to land a punch back or how you were going to respond back, even if it wasn't in a negative way of, setting your boundaries or even highlighting a key fact that you feel that person needs. The minute you're up there rehearsing, the minute you're up here thinking about what you're going to say next, you're not listening. And if you want them to listen to you during this conversation, because there's no point in rehearsing something that no one hears. So you have to give them the same respect and listen to them while they're doing it. Now, these are just 3 examples. There are others, and you will find that you will do them. And so here's my challenge to you, okay? Is during a conversation, maybe it's personal, maybe it's work, not one that you're facilitating. It's probably not the best if you're up there and you're like super obvious right at this when you're challenging yourself the very first time, but maybe one that just as you're kind of an observer of a bigger conversation, maybe you're not an active participant to start. I want you to level up each time. Notice, give yourself a little checklist. Everybody likes to give themselves a check, even if it's a check, I did this. But notice which blocks come up for you while you're listening. Do you identify? Are you rehearsing? Are you comparing? Are you doing others where you're dreaming or derailing, as you're going forward? Do you have a primary block that comes up? I have a primary block at home. I have a different primary block at work. But I actually do a number of them, and I do them frequently. And so you need to become more aware of what your blocks are so that you can let them go faster and find little techniques to let them go so that you can get back to listening as quickly as possible. So that's your challenge for each one of you, is start easy. Start with one where you're just the observer, you're just a listening participant, and just notice what happens. Pay attention to where your mind goes. Does it stay focused on listening, or does it go up here into your own head and in different ways? Even if it's justified, even if you think it's a valid reason, notice. And how long are you up there? How long does it take before you can get back to listening? And then as you get through that first one, then level up. Maybe it is the one where you're an active participant. Maybe then it is when you're facilitating. How are you listening? What are you doing? Are you rehearsing what you're going to open the next exercise with? Or are you listening, engaged, and present in that moment? the more you practice this, the more you become aware of this, the more it's easier to notice it, let it go, and get right back to where you need to be. So we'll open it up for some questions. I'm very happy that the internet was not as problematic for me this go around. It was very distracting the last one, so I apologize for that. It was kind of a mess, but today it seems much better. So we will open it up for questions, and I have to go to my trusty little phone and do the thing that clearly I am not listening, but since I'm not talking to anybody, it's okay. I'm talking out to the ether right now, and where it goes. Um, what are some other tricks? So some other tricks. Let me give a trick for rehearsing. Um, when I find that I'm rehearsing and not listening, I kind of give. Oh, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this. Not really, but slightly, just slightly. I actually remind myself that my ability to improv, my ability to react on the spot, is one of my key assets. And actually, the more that I rehearse, the worse that I sometimes do, because then I'm fumbling over the words because I wait, that's not the words I said I was going to say, and it actually will throw me more. And so I tend to have to like almost give myself a little pep talk of reminding that I can respond and react to anything, and that I'll make it flow. And actually, flow always sounds better coming from me personally than some scripted dynamic. And so I have to remind myself of that, which then releases some of the stress and the anxiety and the desire for me to rehearse over and over again. Um, Now, if you don't feel like you're like, Patricia, I'm not, that is not one of my skill sets. Then make sure you rehearse a little bit beforehand, especially if you've got to get up on the stage. Do that rehearsal in the morning. Do that thing before you get into that room. Do that last final check with it before they start talking. Have something available to where you can just read that first sentence after they finish speaking, as before you have to head up. Little things along those lines might be really helpful. Okay, let's see what else we have. Um, Questions from this. Okay, so yes, you're. The question is, if these are natural, then aren't they part of listening? Um, no, I don't think so. They're natural in terms of how we communicate. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're part of the listening part. And so, a lot of them are habits we build, narratives we tell ourselves, things along those lines. And so we have to make sure that when we're engaging, um, if especially as a leader, if my goal as a leader is creating a space for somebody to be heard and to explore and to work through the problems themselves to make them more anti-fragile and grow, I need to be listening. I don't need to be solving the problems. I don't need to be worried about me and super efficient. I don't need all of those tools and techniques that I believe have helped, when in reality what they need most is for me to just be present and listen. So I would say in some ways, yes, they're natural. They're part of how we communicate and interact. They don't necessarily mean that's how you listen. And so if listening is your ultimate goal, you're going to have to work, to minimize these blocks and to prevent them from occurring, or at least minimizing how frequently they occur and how long you're in them. I'd say I've been working on this for quite some time. I still find they come up, and if I'm not aware or I'm not really trying to be present, I can get lost in them very easily. When I'm in a coaching session and I really need to listen and be present and create a space for the other person, I now it's getting easier and easier for me to nope, gone, nope, nope, and it's just and it goes away from that. So with that, let me highlight a few things in coming up. I am doing a conflict workshop next week on the 13th. It's a mini little workshop. It's an experiment. I had a lot of people ask me after the conflict live stream to do a little bit deeper in terms of, well, how do I, if I'm in that place and I've got some drama, how do I work through it? And so I'm going to do a mini 2 hour workshop. We'll put that link because it's not you can't publicly find it right now. So we'll actually put that into this live stream chat window afterwards with the passcode to get in and a discount code for watching the live and finding access to this. So I'll make sure to work with Ashton to get that in before the end of, well, not before the end of this live stream, but before the end of today. So I'm doing that. It is half full already, so letting you know, and I am capping it just because I do want people to be able to really practice and work through how they want to approach and work through some conflict. So I have that coming up. I have a Leading Amazing Teams, which is a course dedicated and focused on giving coaching skills, which partially listening skills, to leaders that I'll be doing with Jake Calabrese in September. This is a public virtual class that we were going to be hosting in Denver and not so much anymore. So we will be hosting it virtual. That also is about, I think, half full already. So that is available. We'll put that out as well. I know that there are some advanced CSMs. I have one in September. I think Jake has one this next month, or actually this next month. I have one next month in September that will be virtual. Jake Calabrese has one this month, I think next week. And that course is really dedicated and focused on improving and increasing your facilitation skills. And so that is available. Those will be on our website as well. And because, I am actively involved in the racial equity series with Agile Alliance, the next event and registration is going to be getting up for that on August 14th in the series for that, where we're starting to come up with potential experiments and prototypes and that we can do to improve racial equity within the Agile community. That will be on August 14th. And then today I am also doing... which I actually just realized. So I just had a listening block hit and I derailed in terms of something else that I need to think about and realize that I didn't post about that in LinkedIn at all to give people information about. Lizzie Morris and myself are doing a live online kind of conversation about tough discussions and topics that might seem taboo in the workplace, and we're trying to get rid of the stop talking about it. Instead, let's continue the conversation and be able to have that open. So I'll also put a post of that because now I just realized my listening block went derail. I've got to go get that out on LinkedIn. I forgot completely to post anything about that this week, so I'm feeling really guilty right now. And see, it happened. Good thing I didn't have to listen to anybody else, but my brain is already over in someplace else. So those are the upcoming things for myself, and in the near term, I'm building skills and knowledge. Until next time, I'll be back in 2 weeks, but be safe.